Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 14 of season 2 of the QuitCast. Today, we're talking about something called the stuck list. The stuck list. And it's part of our writer's block series, but this is something that generally I find a lot of writers don't consider being stuck to be the same thing as writer's block. And so I wanted to both have it in and also separate it out. We're going to do a question the premise episode on this as well. I find that we're doing a lot of QTP episodes lately, in addition to the writer's blocks, that they sort of function dually because there are a lot of myths out there about how everything is the same for everyone, and therefore there is one right answer. And of course, if you know me at all, you know that I don't believe that that's true because I have seen that it isn't, and because also the science says that there isn't, but the science is young in this arena, and so we're working on that right now. But in the meantime, we are going to talk about specifically why it's important to acknowledge that when you're stuck in your manuscript, that it doesn't come from the same place for everyone. And so there are different ways to get unstuck. And we're going to talk about something that I call the stuck list. So one of the interesting things about writers is that in general, we are very unaware of how our process works for us. For the most part, we are either subconscious or unconsciously writing. And so we tend to not realize that we're really stuck until it's time to execute something, right? And we're like, wait, I haven't written, or my word count has gone down, or I keep rewriting this scene. And instead of saying, okay, I'm stuck, I need to get unstuck, we're more subconscious or unconscious about it. And so we want to bring that awareness to the stuckness of where we are so that we can get out of it quickly. And we coach people to have what I call the stuck list. So instead of developing one stuck list for myself, back when I originally started teaching a version of WBF in 2014 and 2015, I originally wanted to come up with the stuck list with a capital T, right, which is the thing that would get everyone unstuck. And what, of course, we realized the more that we worked with authors is that there's no such thing as something that works for everyone. Well, I wanted something that would work for everyone. Which, of course, oh, my sweet summer child, I think, in my head, right? But what I realized is we do want to have a stuck list for ourselves. And so what we're going to do today is try to help you develop this tool. It's one of the tools that we use in our coaching quite a bit, of having a list of things that will get you consistently unstuck. You particularly, not writers, right? Like, this isn't about all writers. It's not about everyone having the same list. It's that we each have a different list and we should keep it visible for us. So here's how we're going to develop this process individually. First, you have to look at your own patterns. You have to look backward to see, where have I commonly gotten stuck? And this is part of what we do in coaching, right? When we're stuck on an individual manuscript, we always talk about what are the patterns, where have you been before? And so we want to simulate that a little bit for you today with coaching. So you want to look backwards at the patterns, because the way to get unstuck is to know exactly why you are stuck and to know how to apply the correct diagnostic tool to that particular place. And so a lot of it is then understanding the patterns that you have had in the past and why they are happening. So we want to, I do think that the first two steps are really important in this, and the looking back at the patterns. What was it that was consistently the place, right? Like, most of us have a place or a couple of places, or if we're consistently get stuck. I know there are several people who mention patterns like this, right? I get stuck every couple of days and I have to just go and think, and then I can see it again, and then I come back. One of the coaching conversations that I have a lot is write until you can't see it. So write whatever you see and then write until you can't see it. And that's a pattern of getting stuck and unstuck, right? So you want to look backwards and see what your patterns are. Is it always at the turning point? Is it always beginnings? Is it always middles? Is it always the climax? Or is it every pinch point? Is it every couple of chapters? Is it the end of every chapter, right? Like, you want to look backwards and see for yourself what your patterns have been. The other question that's important in step one, it's like a part B, because sometimes there are themes that get particular authors stuck. So for instance, it's I always get stuck. I write cozy mysteries is one of the fiction genres that I write in. uh, I consistently get stuck at the point where I have set all of the threads ready to unravel. And it's at a different point in the book every time, but that's always the theme for me is, uh-oh, I have to stop opening threads now, and now I have to close threads. And so that place, I always get stuck because I have to kind of go through and figure out, okay, which were all the threads that I open and how am I going to close those things? And that's a very different way, right? Because sometimes that's at 30%, sometimes it's at 65%. It depends for me. And so, are you a thematic stuckness sort of writer? So that's step one. The second step, and this should be fairly easy for most of us, is what got you unstuck when you were stuck last time. And I want to look at multiple different books and hopefully multiple different patterns. But what is it that gets you unstuck in those particular things? If there is a consistent thing, but it's always the last thing that you think to go for, like, oh, I don't want to call my friend because I don't want to bother them. But when I look back at the last 8 manuscripts that I finished, consistently, that's what helps me to get unstuck. And again, I'm talking about myself personally because I just can't, there's something about my brain where I can't translate everything that I think onto paper until I've verbalized it somehow, right? And so I have to have that transition between I've been thinking, and now I have to talk for a little bit and then I can think again, right? So I've noticed that about myself. The last manuscripts I've written have all been like that. So now I intentionally have that on my stuck list. It says, call Crystal, literally, like, because I know that I need to do that, right? So you want to look at the things that got you unstuck specifically. It might be things like, I finally stopped trying to write every day and took a day off. I finally decided to write every day and stop taking time off, right? It's different for every person, but we want to look at what is consistent. So if you have a fluke, we want to put that to the side for a second, put that on a separate list. And we want to look at what has been consistent for you. And then we want to make a list of all of those things because we're going to go over that list in a minute. But the important part is looking backwards at the patterns, right? That's step one and step two. So the third step is then to look at that list and to analyze the why. What is it that's causing you to get stuck? So what I did here in the next few minutes is I collected some of the most common whys that we have found. This list is not exhaustive, but it's intended to give you sort of a jumping off point to figure out where your whys might fit. And we're going to talk about 5 of the whys and where they come from and why it's important to have particular strategies that can attack what exactly is wrong. It's very similar to being diagnosed with an illness. You want to look at all the symptoms, figure out where it's really coming from, and then apply medicine directly and only to that place. Because you don't want to throw off the rest of the system of the writing, right? We want the system to remain largely the same for the sake of efficiency, and we want to just attack the thing that's wrong. Instead of like applying a whole new system, which might throw off everything about what makes you good at what you're good at. So we want to be very granular in how we target things because your productivity is a system. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. So I'm going to cover 5 of the most common whys behind why we get stuck. And then you'll see when we can figure out the why, then we know what the solution is and why those two are linked. And then we can short circuit in the future having to think around or cast around for these things and just go directly to the stuck list. And that's what we want. So here are the 5 that I could think of off the top of my head, 5 whys. The first why is that you might be stuck because there's a part of the story that you can't see right now. When this is the case, we're typically seeing a few different strengths. Strategic, intellection, context, and ideation are the most common. Individualization is one that can also have some overlap here, but typically we see one of the others with it. So strategic, intellection, context, and ideation. And here's why each one of those might not be able to see this particular part of the story yet. So strategics often are looking ahead at roadblocks, right? So often there is a roadblock ahead, and there's one piece of information that they need to get that roadblock out of the way or to choose a different path. And that one piece of information is something that they have to come across. They have to almost discover it. So either they have to think about it enough that they'll find it, which typically coincides with other strengths as well, or there is literally a piece of research or input or something that they have to stumble across almost in order to make this roadblock be effective. There are a couple of ways that you can address this. One is definitely talking about it, because when you start to bump up against it a lot, it'll frustrate you and you'll feel like, what's going on here? Why can't I figure this out? And usually then as a strategic, you can see your way around it. But the finding of the piece of information is often something that you need to do some research or go away in order to make happen, right? Like you have to go watch or read or look for something. And I always encourage people to take the things that are research worthy and do that specific research. So instead of like, let's just generically go back and look at the War of 1812 because I happen to be writing in 1806. No, go to the, like, what is the very specific job that your character has, or what types of tools are they using, or what, trajectories do their people in that particular occupation typically have, things like that. That's what we're looking for, is the one thing that you're either skipping over and don't know it or have not found yet. A context is very similar. There's typically something in the character's backstory, and individualization has an overlap with this as well, that there may be a piece of information missing about them that you don't know yet that will help change the way that you see them. We have a couple of archetype suggestions that we typically make for this. One of them is the Heroes and Heroines book by Tammy Cowden. We'll link to that in the show notes. The other is onestopforwriters.com. They have the thesauri, which I love that word, thesauri, where it's the emotional wound or the backstory, and you can go and look for where that piece might fit in. And often it's that piece that's missing that is the thing that's going to open the story up. And so we want to know where to go looking for that. When ideation is stuck here because there's something that they can't see, typically what they need is that new piece of information or the right question to ask. And I find that this often does happen in conversation with other people, or when it can happen with an introvert when you're looking for things and you stumble across again, but you have to go looking for those things. So you want to know where your go-to sources are. If there's a person who asks you great questions, you want to make sure to have them on your stuck list. If there's a person who will just let you talk until you stumble across it on your own, you want to have them on your stuck list. If there's a particular place you can go where you always get great ideas, again, that's why we suggest the thesaurus or the archetypes or something like that. But when there's a part of the story you can't see, you have to feed yourself whatever it is that you need until you can see it. And those particular pieces, the tools that you go to use, those are the things you want to put on your stuck list. Number 2 is that you might be stuck because you're headed in the wrong direction in the story. And this typically happens when you've either made a choice behind you or a character has been misaligned. And I see this a lot more with connectedness, individualization, and strategic than anything else. But it's by no means limited to those strengths. It's just where we see it the most often. So with connectedness, I typically suggest, this will make you laugh if you're a connectedness, random writing prompts. Because I think there's a lot of, when you have these ideation or connectedness, individualization, strategic, the strengths that are all about the connections between data or the connections between events or the connections between people, that often the requirement that you have when you start to write about something that isn't the novel, or when you're forced to create something that is not related to the story, that it can sort of lead you in that direction. And that's the connectedness. This is why I suggest some of those books like random writing prompts. I always tell the story about the Poetry of Three Things. I had a writers group, and we used to meet every week and we would write together as well as read each other's work. And we always used to start with this random writing prompt, and it was called The Poetry of Three Things. And each one of us would pick one thing, and then we would say them all out loud. And we would each have to write a poem that included those three things naturally in the poem. And I found that the force, again, it's an ideation, it's a connectedness, it's a strategic individualization. The force of having to do something that was totally random and unrelated unlocked something. And so this is why I do think that story prompts can be helpful, even if you are not writing about whatever it is in the story that's happening. Like some of the prompts you get are not going to fit into whatever your novel or genre is, but the act of writing something random can often help, or quote unquote random, right? If you have connectedness, can often help to get unstuck. And that's a really important thing. If that has worked for you in the past, make sure that you continue to utilize that as a way to get unstuck. The third why is that you may be stuck in an emotional hard spot and you need to take a break, right? Because the high empathy, connectedness, relator, developer, harmony, some of those strengths that are about the emotions or the relationships that we have with people are not limited to real people in the real world. They also happen with fictional people as well. So if you have any of those strengths that are very affected by emotions, it's important to know that that won't always be limited to the people in the world. It may also happen with your characters. So if you're writing particularly difficult scenes or parts of the book with your characters and you are not in an emotionally great place either, it can cause a level of stuckness that sometimes is not permanent in terms of you won't ever be able to get beyond it, but until you recognize what it is and what you really need, then you won't be able to get beyond it, right? And so what we typically do is we encourage relational connectedness, right? We either encourage emotional or physical intimacy. We encourage a lot of stability producing. So like if you're a quality time, love language person, get some good quality time. If you're a acts of service, get some good acts of service in. If you are a physical touch, if you're words of affirmation, whatever it is that makes your relationships feel whole and complete, you want to make sure to get those things when you know you're approaching times where you have to write turmoil in your books, if you have some of those strengths. And I've encouraged this fairly aggressively with people who have these relationship building strengths. I usually say, if you are not currently aware of this, you need to become aware that when you have to write hard emotional stuff in your books, you need to have as full of a tank emotionally as you can. It's not a good time to be being totally drained by stress, right? You want to get yourself above the line, do whatever you can with energy pennies to make more pennies so you can be as full as possible, because it's going to take a lot out of you to write that style of writing. And a lot of high empathy, high harmony, high developer connectedness, relator, a lot of them get stuck, or a lot of us, because I have some of those as well, get stuck when we write those parts of the book. And so we just want to make sure that our tank is full in order to be able to write those. So what you want to do then with the stuck list is you want to put those activities on your stuck list and make sure that you're always asking yourself the question of, am I in the best empathy or connectedness place to write what I have to write right now? And if I'm not, how can I strategically go after that thing and make sure that I can get to a better place so that I can write what I have to write? This is a fun one, number 4. You might be stuck because you've written yourself into a corner. I know a lot of pantsers or plotzers or any form of discovery writer will often do this, and it actually creates a lot of tension in their books, and it can be really effective from a reader's perspective because it creates a lot of immediacy. But then you do sort of write yourself into that corner and then you get stuck. This happens a lot with strategic, with ideation, with adaptability. And so we just want to look at, where is that coming from? If you've written yourself into a corner because we're back at number 2 or number 1, right, where we've either made mistakes behind us or there are mistakes ahead of us, and we need to do some of those more strategic changes, then that is it. But also, you can just write yourself into a corner. And I think what we suggest a lot is that sort of brainstorming that can happen, not necessarily so you take anybody else's ideas, and you have to kind of prepare your friends to do this style of brainstorming with you, because if you are this type of person, you won't always take the advice that they give you about whatever it is that you're supposed to change, right? But what you do want is to be able to have that place that you can converse and get ideas and push yourself and look at it from different angles and see how you can get out of this corner that you've written yourself into, because this is actually a really effective way of writing when you're writing into the dark, or when you're a discovery writer, is that you write yourself into an unsolvable problem, and then you look at it enough that you can solve it, and then it feels, real to the readers, because it was really an unsolvable problem until you realize whatever you need to realize. So that's really important. If you have a particular brainstorming partner, if you have a thesaurus or something that you go to, if you have a particular TV show that always gives you great ideas, or nonfiction reading, it's important to put those things on your stuck list and go directly there. It's like you're thinking about drugs. You want to go where the hard stuff is. We don't want to spend any time with the gateways. We want to go for the hard stuff, right? When it comes to being stuck. So the fifth one is you might be stuck because you lost the plot. This is sort of a fun one to talk about, because I've been guilty of this before, because sometimes we get so into our own characters or our world or our situations that we actually lose the thread of what we were telling the story about. And we start to get very focused on things like writing them talking with people for no reason, or eating food, or sitting around, or going places that don't have any relevancy to the plot, or letting ourselves wander, right? So, of course, if you're writing certain types of fantasy, that might be exactly what they expect. But if the expectation is that you're going to keep yourself within the boundaries of tension, that there's going to be some kind of plot and story that's happening, then you need to make sure to address this if it happens. If you tend to be a person who wanders like this, you want to make sure that you're constantly asking yourself those questions. And there's a couple of helpful things, tools that I want to pass along, of things that you could potentially add to your stuck list. One is K.M. Weiland's Character Arcs book. We'll link to it in the show notes. She does a really good job of asking questions, and I think there's a workbook companion that goes with this as well. But she does a really good job of asking questions that require you to have an answer that is either that's about some forward plot motion, right? It's the stakes, or it's the tension, motivation, conflict. There's something about it, the answer, that will help to propel you forward if this is what's happening to you. There's also a Writer Unboxed blog post that's free. I think it's called it might be three or four questions to ask when you're stuck. We'll link to it in the show notes. I tend to encourage people who consistently lose the plot in their books to put all of those questions right on their stuck list. Like the very first thing you go to is asking the first question, just to see if that's where you are, where you have lost the plot. There's also a super helpful short video by the creators of South Park, who, and depending on whether you like South Park or not, shouldn't affect whether you like this video. It's just a really good story mechanism. And Terry sent this to me. It was such a great little 2-minute explanation. I encourage you to watch it. But it's about why the tension of related events matters in story to propel stories forward. That kind of relationship between the events really matters a lot in the tension of the reader being engaged in the book. So I encourage you to go watch that. That video I will often put on my own stuck list, especially when I'm writing outside of mystery, because I have a mystery sort of plot that I follow, but because I want to keep that tension always in the back of my mind. And so anyway, go watch that video. I think it's a really good one. But you want to be conscious when you are a lost the plot, stuck writer. You always want to be conscious of moving the story forward. And so putting things on your stuck list that help to remind you, have I been moving the story forward, is a really, really good idea. So those are the 5. Let's say that you suffer from 1 or 2 or 3 or 5, or how maybe more even than what we more of the whys than what we outlined here, what I want you to do then is to go get a piece of paper, or like I have a bunch of sticky notes. That's my stuck list. That's just on the side of my monitor, my Mac monitor. Um, Go and get something to write on so that you will see it. So you either want to put it up somewhere around your computer, or like I said, I literally put mine on my desk and on my computer, and write those questions down so that you see them. Because like we talked about at the beginning, there's so much subconscious or unconscious process that's a part of our writing that we will often lose time and not need to. And so anytime we have an ability to get ahead of ourselves and to get unstuck before we get too stuck, is something that we really want to do for our just the general feeling of accomplishment in our writing. And everybody's will be different, and you may not get stuck. You may not have this issue, but on the off chance that you do, then we're giving you a tool that you can use in the future. And so I hope this has been helpful. Sometimes, and I have some clients whose whole stuck list, literally, because they're so high in intellection or deliberative or ideation, is literally just walk away. It's just 2 words. That's it. That's the whole stuck list. And they have to remember, don't sit at the computer and analyze what's wrong. Walk away, let yourself process it, and then push yourself back to the computer until you're ready to move forward. And I know what you're thinking, but Becca, I'll remember. Trust me, I'll know that I'm stuck, and you won't. Most of us don't know that we're stuck until it's too late, because we're not doing it consciously. It's not like I hit a spot and I'm like, most of us, because most of us are not this self-aware. We're not hitting a spot and thinking, I don't know what happens next. I guess I'd better reach for my suck list. Like, we're not consciously thinking that, most of us. And so what we want to do is to take those tools that have worked for us in the past, make the list, put it somewhere you can see it. And then once you start to feel yourself drift away, then you want to go directly to those tools. Some of the tools also that might help, and I'm just going to say things that have helped for other people. We do The Office, right? And if you haven't seen that episode, I highly recommend going back and watching it. There are some pieces of The Office that, because of the way I'm wired, it just makes it easier for me to get unstuck, because I have that ability to reach out very quickly because there are people around me, because I'm so social. And so having some kind of idea of what works the best for you, having it written down somewhere so that you know when you look for it and you don't have to wait until you notice it, that's really key. Because the data is against us. The data does not say that most of us will know when we're stuck. Most of us lose time, and then we realize we have been stuck because we realize that we've lost time, but we're losing time unconsciously. So go out, get yourself a stuck list, watch for the signs, watch your brain, watch your words. We want you to get unstuck as quickly as possible. So thank you so much for being here today. I hope this has been helpful. Don't forget that we have the monthly drawing for coaching appointments with our coaches. If you spend 30 minutes in your manuscript, we call those MTBs, 30 minutes, writing, thinking, editing, plotting, talking. We'll add brainstorm talking, but time in your manuscript, 30 minutes. Send us an email, writersblockchallenge@gmail.com. Every single time you do one of those 30-minute blocks. At the end of each month, we're going to draw for 3 different winners, one for Susan, one for Terry, and one for Becca. And so just for that accountability of you sending us your MTB emails one at a time, each email is 1 entry, you can potentially be rewarded for that. And so in addition to the fact that a lot of people are externally motivated and just the accountability alone helps them, we also want to give you the opportunity to win stuff, because why not, right? So we're going to give some stuff away randomly. Every once in a while, we'll give away a coupon for a class, or we'll give away maybe a free class. Sometimes we'll give away coaching opportunities and all kinds of stuff, books, whatever you want, we'll give it away. That's what we're here for. But because we just want you to write better faster. That is what we're here for. So thank you guys for being here on the QuitCast with us today. I hope that this has been helpful. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you know someone who's consistently stuck, please share this video with them just to help them get unstuck faster. That's all that we're hoping to do. So share the stuck list. We hope to see you guys next week on the QuitCast. We'll be back again with a mystery strength. We don't know which one it is yet, but we'll see you guys next week.